My name is Leo Chin, and for the better part of my 32 years, I've felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own family portrait. I grew up in the misty, evergreen embrace of Portland, Oregon, a city that prizes authenticity and quiet craftsmanship. My grandfather was a woodworker, a man whose hands spoke a language of patience and love, coaxing stories from oak and pine. He taught me that the value of a thing wasn't in its price tag, but in the soul poured into its creation. After he passed, that ethos became my compass. My father, David, had inherited that same love for craft, but life, as it often does, had other plans. A brutal recession in the early 2000s forced him to sell the family home my grandfather built, the one with the sprawling black walnut tree in the backyard, and trade his woodshop for the predictable safety of a senior accountant's desk. The dreamer in him was shuttered away, replaced by a man who preached the gospel of practicality, a gospel I seemed determined to ignore. This history hung in the air, thick as the scent of rain on asphalt, as I cycled toward the Chartwell for our annual family dinner. The restaurant, perched on the banks of the Willamette River, was my father's choice every year. It was a place of dated opulence, with heavy velvet curtains, stiff white tablecloths, and a menu that hadn't changed since the Reagan administration. It was a monument to the kind of success my family understood: solid, visible, and expensive. I locked my well-worn bicycle to a lamppost, the simple click of the lock a quiet rebellion against the purr of German engineering that filled the valet-tended parking lot. My cousin, Mark, was already there, holding court by the entrance. He was a real estate developer, a man who built glass and steel monoliths that scraped the sky, each one a testament to his ambition. "Leo, you're not still riding that thing, are you?" he boomed, gesturing to my bike with a sweep of his hand. His wrist, as always, sported a watch that cost more than my first 2 years of rent. "I've got a guy who can get you a great deal on a Tesla. You've got to project success, buddy." "I like the ride," I said, offering a small smile. "It helps me think." "Think about what?" "How to save on gas." He laughed, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. Inside, the scene was a familiar tableau. My mother, Sarah, her face etched with a gentle anxiety, was already trying to smooth the waters before they'd even been disturbed. My Aunt Carol, Mark's mother, was showing off a new diamond bracelet, her voice a high, sharp trill that cut through the low hum of dinner conversation. My father stood by the window, staring out at the river, his shoulders slumped with a familiar weight. He saw me and his expression flickered, a complex cocktail of love, concern, and a deep, abiding disappointment. "Leo," he said, his voice quiet. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it, Dad." We settled at the large, round table, the lazy Susan in the center, already laden with appetizers. The conversation, as always, orbited around the twin suns of wealth and status. Aunt Carol detailed the progress of Mark's latest luxury condo project, the Pinnacle, with the reverence of a disciple. "The penthouses sold before we even broke ground," she announced to the table. "Mark is a genius. He just has that Midas touch. Everything he builds is so significant." Mark, ever the humble magnate, demurred with a wave of his hand. "We're just providing what the market wants. People want to live in a statement. They want to know they've arrived." He turned his gaze to me, a predatory glint in his eye. "Speaking of which, Leo, what's new with your project? Still doing that little website thing?" My little website thing was Terra Firma Analytics, a company I had started from my drafty garage 5 years ago. "It's going well," I said, keeping my tone even. "We're making some good progress." "Good progress." Aunt Carol chirped, her tone dripping with pity. "That's nice, dear. Is it paying the bills?" "Your mother worries. She says you work all hours, but for what? You live in that tiny rental, you ride a bicycle. We just want you to be secure." "I'm secure, Aunt Carol," I said, the words feeling thin even to me. How could I explain what I did? We used satellite imagery and complex AI to analyze soil health, water tables, and climate patterns for massive reforestation and sustainable agriculture projects around the globe. We weren't building flashy condos. We were helping to heal the planet, one data point at a time. But in this room, success wasn't measured in hectares reforested or communities fed. It was measured in square footage and quarterly earnings reports. My father sighed, a sound I knew well. It was the sound of his own abandoned dreams, a sigh that said, "I tried to tell you. I tried to warn you that passion doesn't pay the mortgage." "Your cousin just closed a $30 million deal, Leo," he said, not looking at me but at the glittering lights of the city across the river. "He's building something tangible. Something people can see." The subtext was clear. "And what are you building? Pixels on a screen? Code in the cloud?" "It's nothing. It's air." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the ghost of a younger self who had desperately craved his father's approval. For years, I had tried to explain my vision, to show him the beauty and importance of the work. But he couldn't see past the lack of traditional trappings. He had been burned by his own creative fire, and now he was terrified that I was flying too close to the same sun. To distract myself, I reached into the inside pocket of my simple tweed jacket and pulled out my fountain pen. It was my grandfather's habit, one I'd adopted, jotting down thoughts and ideas on a small, leather-bound notebook. As I uncapped it, the waiter arrived to take our main course orders. I set the pen down on the tablecloth beside my plate. It was a simple, elegant object, at least at first glance. It wasn't flashy. It had no gold or jewels. Its beauty was in its form, a warm, dark, lustrous wood, polished to a satin sheen by years of use. The grain was deep and complex, a swirling map of time. Mark noticed it immediately. "What is that thing? Did you whittle it yourself on your way over?" he snickered. "It's a fountain pen," I said calmly. "Looks old," and Carol observed. "You should get yourself a nice Mont Blanc, Leo. It shows you mean business." I smiled faintly. "I like this one. It has history." My father, who had been lost in his own world, glanced over. His eyes, accustomed to the fine details of spreadsheets, fell upon the pen. He froze. The fork in his hand stilled halfway to his mouth. His gaze sharpened, and a strange, unreadable emotion washed over his face. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes tracing the intricate grain of the wood as if reading a long-lost language. "Leo," he said, his voice raspy, a stranger to the table. "The pen. Where did you get it?" The entire table fell silent, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Mark looked from my father to the pen, a confused smirk still playing on his lips. "I don't know, some antique store?" Mark guessed. "Probably worth $20. "It's made of black walnut," my father whispered, ignoring his son completely. He was speaking only to me now. His eyes were wide with a dawning, impossible recognition. "The grain, that knot right there near the cap." "I know that knot." My mother looked between us, her brow furrowed with concern. "David, what is it?" "It's just a pen." "No," he breathed, his eyes locked on mine. "It's not just any walnut. That's from the tree. Our tree." Aunt Carol let out an impatient scoff. "What tree?" "David, you're not making any sense." But I knew exactly what he meant. He was talking about the magnificent black walnut that had stood sentinel in the backyard of the house my grandfather built, the house we'd lost. My father had spent his childhood climbing its branches and his early adulthood planning projects with its wood, projects that never came to be. He knew every line and whirl of its bark like the back of his own hand. "How?" he asked, his voice trembling. I took a slow sip of water, allowing the silence to stretch. "I kept a piece of the lumber," I said softly. "After you sold the house, I went back and spoke to the new owners. I asked if I could have a small section from a branch that had fallen in a storm. They were kind enough to let me. But the pen itself," he stammered. "The craftsmanship. It's flawless." This was the part Mark, with his developer's eye for brand names and market value, could latch onto. "So you had it made?" "Who makes custom pens out of old firewood?" "A man named Kenjiro Tanaka," I replied. Mark blinked. Even he, in his world of luxury brands, had heard the name. Kenjiro Tanaka was a living legend in the world of bespoke craftsmanship, a Japanese artisan who made fewer than a dozen pens a year. His clients were rumored to be royalty, tech billionaires, and reclusive artists. His waiting list was a decade long, and his creations were considered masterpieces, commanding prices that were never publicly disclosed, but whispered about in collector circles. The Tanaka? Mark sputtered, his condescension evaporating into pure disbelief. That's impossible. You can't just call him. I didn't call him, I said. I flew to his studio in the mountains of Kyushu. I showed him the wood, told him the story, and explained what I wanted to build with my life. He seemed to understand. The silence that followed was profound. It was a silence filled with the frantic recalibration of every assumption they had ever made about me. Aunt Carol's diamond bracelet suddenly seemed gaudy. Mark's talk of the pinnacle felt hollow. A Tanaka pen, Mark whispered, pulling out his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. The last one at a private auction. Christ. They go for more than a car. A very, very nice car. Give or take, I said, echoing his earlier tone. Depending on the market. My mother finally found her voice. Leo, honey, how? We thought. I mean, the bicycle. I ride the bike because my work is all-consuming, I explained, my voice gentle. I'm in my head all day, wrestling with complex systems. The ride to and from my office is the only time I feel truly grounded. It's when I see the sky, feel the wind, and solve the problems I can't untangle at a desk. It's not about saving money. It's about saving my sanity. My father was still staring at the pen, but his expression had changed. The disappointment was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant awe. It was the look of a man seeing a ghost, not of a person, but of a possibility he thought long dead. But your company, Mark pressed, his face pale as he scrolled through his phone. Terra Firma Analytics. I can't find a valuation. It's a private company. What does it even do? We help organizations make better decisions about the land, I said simply. We work with large-scale environmental foundations, sovereign wealth funds, and global NGOs. We provide the data that underpins some of the largest reforestation and climate adaptation projects on the planet. I paused, then added, actually, Mark, your new waterfront development, the Azure, down in the South Waterfront, you had to do that extensive environmental impact report and wetlands restoration plan last year, right? He nodded numbly, his eyes wide. Our software was used by the city and the environmental consultancy to model the long-term impact on the river's ecosystem, I said. We helped define the parameters for your mitigation work. The look on his face was a portrait of dawning horror. He, the master builder, the titan of tangible assets, had unknowingly been dancing to a tune composed by his unsuccessful cousin. But that contract must have been worth a fortune, he stammered. We provided the initial modeling pro bono, I said. It was a pilot program for a new municipal partnership. We believe some things are more important than profit. Aunt Carol, ever the pragmatist, saw a new angle. Pro bono? Leo, darling, you can't run a business giving things away. You should be monetizing. Mark could introduce you to investors. I held up a hand, stopping her. Thank you, Aunt Carol, but we're not looking for funding. We closed our last round 2 years ago. It was led by the Nordic Earth Foundation. The name dropped into the silence like a stone into a still pond. The Nordic Earth Foundation was one of the largest and most respected philanthropic organizations in the world, a behemoth of environmental capital. They invested in your website, my father asked, his voice barely a whisper. They're our primary partners, I corrected gently. Their endowment funds our operational costs, which allows us to focus on impact rather than revenue. Our valuation isn't measured in dollars, Dad. It's measured in the 1 billion trees planted in the Amazon, the restoration of mangrove forests in Southeast Asia, the viability of drought-resistant crops in the Sahel. That's the tangible we're building. I let that sink in. The clatter of cutlery and the murmur of other diners seemed to fade into a distant hum. My family, who had built their identities on a foundation of measurable wealth, was being confronted with a different kind of currency, one they had no way to count. My father picked up the pen. He didn't ask. His hand, which I had only ever seen hold a pen to sign checks or fill out tax forms, cradled the warm wood with an innate, forgotten familiarity. He ran his thumb over the knot he had recognized, his eyes closing for a moment. I could almost see him, A boy in the shade of that great tree, dreaming of the things he would one day build. The soul, he murmured, so softly I almost didn't hear him. You saved its soul. The rest of the dinner passed in a surreal haze. The usual boasting and one-upmanship was gone, replaced by an awkward, deferential silence. Aunt Carol asked me 3 times if I was warm enough. Mark, for the first time in his life, seemed to have nothing to say at all. He just stared at his plate, occasionally glancing at me with a look of terrified respect. My mother, however, simply watched me, her eyes shining with a light I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't pride in my success, not in the way Aunt Carol would understand it. It was a look of profound relief, the look of a mother who sees her child not just surviving, but thriving on a path of his own making. She saw that my quietness wasn't weakness, and my simplicity wasn't a sign of failure. It was a choice. After the bill was paid quietly by me, a fact no one commented on, we all shuffled out into the cool, damp night. While Mark and Aunt Carol made a great show of waiting for the valet to bring their cars, my father and I stood off to the side, near the Riverwalk. The lights of the Hawthorne Bridge cast a glittering path across the dark water. He still held the pen, turning it over and over in his hands. All these years, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I was so hard on you. I saw you in that garage with your computers and your maps, and all I could see was myself, before I had to be practical. I thought I was protecting you. I know, Dad, I said. I was wrong, he continued, his gaze fixed on the pen. I thought you had to build things people could see and touch to be successful. I thought you had to have the car, the house, the things that proved you were safe. But you were building something bigger all along. You were building on the foundation my father laid. The one I abandoned. He held the pen out to me. This belongs to you. You earned it. I gently pushed his hand back. No, it was always for you. I reached into my jacket again and pulled out a simple, sturdy envelope. And this is too. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He opened the unsealed flap and slid out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a deed. He read the address, and his breath hitched. A choked sound escaped his lips. The old house, he whispered, looking up at me, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Leo, how? The owners were getting older, I explained. They were looking to downsize. I made them an offer they couldn't refuse a few years ago. I've had a caretaker looking after it. The house is the same. The workshop is the same. And the tree is still there, Dad. It's waiting for you. He sank onto a nearby bench, the deed trembling in his hand. He looked from the paper to the pen, and finally to me. The guarded, anxious man I had known for most of my adult life was gone. In his place was a glimpse of the dreamer, the craftsman, the man my grandfather had raised. Why? He asked, his voice cracking. Why would you do all this, and never say a word? I sat down beside him, the scent of the river and the damp earth filling the space between us. Because it was never about the money, I said, my voice as quiet as the water. It wasn't about proving you wrong or showing everyone I'd made it. It was about proving you right. You and Grandpa. You taught me that the best things are built with patience, with purpose, and with love. You taught me that some things have a value that can't be measured. I had to build my own workshop first to prove it to myself. And I wanted to give you yours back. My mother walked over, drawn by our stillness. She saw the deed in my father's hand, saw the look on his face, and she understood. She sat on his other side, placing her hand on his arm, her own eyes welling up. Just then, Mark's gleaming black SUV pulled up. He got out, his face a mask of strained nonchalance. Leo, he started, clearing his throat. That foundation you mentioned, the Nordic one. I was just thinking, with my firm's new focus on green building, maybe there's some synergy, some way we could. Mark, my father said, his voice firm and clear, imbued with a strength I hadn't heard in decades. He stood up, the pen in one hand, the deed in the other. Not now. Mark, for once, was speechless. He simply nodded and retreated to his car. My father turned to me. He didn't need to say thank you. It was there in his eyes, in the way he stood a little taller, in the way he held the pen not like a priceless artifact, but like a familiar tool. I have some old plans, he said, a faint, wondrous smile gracing his lips. For a writing desk. I was going to make it from that walnut. I know, I said. I can't wait to see it. I said my goodbyes and walked over to my bicycle. As I unlocked it, I glanced back. My mother and father were standing under the warm glow of the lamplight, side by side. He was showing her the grain of the wood on the pen, his finger tracing the lines, his voice soft but animated, telling a story I knew by heart. It wasn't about the pen's monetary value or its famous creator. It was about a tree and a home and a legacy of building things with soul. I swung my leg over my bike and started to pedal home. The night air was crisp and clean. The rhythmic whir of the chain was a quiet mantra. I wasn't riding away from my family, not anymore. I was riding toward my own quiet life, a life built not on the projection of success, but on the deep, steady, and tangible satisfaction of meaningful work. The tension that had coiled in my chest for years had finally unspooled, leaving behind a profound and peaceful stillness. I had learned that setting boundaries wasn't about pushing people away, but about creating the space to meet them on your own terms, in your own truth. And sometimes, the grandest gesture isn't a spectacle of wealth, but a quiet act of restoration, rebuilding not just a house, but the foundations of a family, one piece of reclaimed history at a time.